Once again, it's a pleasure to be able to share a message with you from this week's Parashat, Parashat Bo. When my brothers were very young, they had a club that they had built in the basement, a fort, in which they spoke a very special language, a language that nobody else could understand. And it was a club that was very exclusive, and I very much wanted to be a part of it, but they kept me out. And I remember from those days what it meant to be excluded, and how the importance of inclusivity is critical to a community. In this week's Parashat, Parashat Bo, the Jewish people leave Egypt. And amidst the turmoil and the tumult of that exodus, a group of people decide to include themselves in the Jewish future, in the Jewish destiny. This group, known as the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, simply joined in as the Hebrews left Egypt. And they became fully part of the community. But it's the next few verses that speak of how the Jewish community becomes defined. Who can participate in the Paschal offering and who cannot? Who can eat and who cannot? And ultimately there is a struggle within the text itself as to how you incorporate people into the community. Understanding full well that there are times in life where there are those who we want to include, but they themselves decide they want to remain distant. There are, on the other hand, circumstances in which people want to fully participate, but we have drawn a standard, a boundary that doesn't allow their inclusion. The Erev Rav ultimately become fully incorporated into the Jewish people. Later, maybe they're blamed by the rabbis for some of the dissension and rebellion that takes place. But it's always easy to blame the outsider for mistakes that occur within. But ultimately, it's one statement in this week's Parsha that makes the greatest comment. In chapter 12, verse 49, it says, Torat achat yeh le'ezrach v'lager hagar b'tochechem. That there should be one Torah, one standard, one line for everybody in the community. It should say to us, says this week's Parsha, that inclusion is important, but it shouldn't be inclusion with strings attached. We ought to make sure that in our lives, when we allow people entry into our personal space, that we do so fully. We embrace them with our arms fully outstretched, not with our arms crossed. We ought to make sure that when we are prepared to move our boundary, to include others, that we allow them to have full access and full entry. Understanding full well that to be a part of our people takes commitment and strength and courage, and sometimes it means that there's a loss that takes place because of a distance from the past. When we include people in our nation and in our destiny and in our future, we ought to do so by fully embracing them and bringing them in, and never, as our rabbis say, remind them that they were once not a part of our destiny. It's a message that's important for us as Jews with regards to bringing people into our fold, but it's a message that's important to us as a nation in terms of how we deal with other people. It's important to us to understand as Americans the unique role we play in the history of humanity, and how people's desire to be a part of our nation ought to be something that we find a way to make accessible to them. The messages of this week's Parsha are wonderful and grand. They speak of plagues and turmoils that are in the past, and a future that's much brighter, a future that includes as many people as possible. Have a wonderful week.